Hi, everyone. It's good to be with you, albeit in this virtual format. I'm Stephanie Coakley. For those of you that don't know me, director here at Pequot Library Association in Southport, Connecticut. And on behalf of all of us at the library, I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's virtual exhibition opening reception for Crossing the Border, the Challenging Truths of Human Migration, and for today's Zoom presentation with guest speaker, artist, printmaker, and muralist living in Portland, Oregon, Roger Peet is with us. Hi, Roger. Momentarily, my colleague Jen Pratt will make more introductory remarks about Roger, who, along with Oakland, California-based artist and activist Fabian Rodriguez, co-organized the Migration Now collection of silkscreen and letterpress prints. These prints illustrate the power art has to engage people in conversation about immigration and the broader global theme of human migration. Thank you again, Roger, for being with us today. And we are so very honored to host you for this important talk. Before I turn things over back to Jen, I want to recognize a number of Pequot Library's dedicated team members, especially Dr. Beth Bowden, our Special Collections Consultant, Chief Librarian, Christine Catallo, and Jen Pratt, Creative Projects Manager. Thank you all for all of your hard work in helping put together our first virtual exhibition. Really appreciate, as always, everyone's work in making this come together. And as always, we thank exhibition support from the Constance Baker Fund. And I want to particularly thank board member and library supporter and friend, John Herzog. It's due to John and many thanks to John that we have the Migration Now portfolio as part of our special collections collection. So I'd like to thank John for that. And as always, I hope all of you are as well as can be, and do know that there will be time for audience questions and discussion immediately following tonight's presentation with Roger. And next up, before we turn things over to Roger, we'll have a video of Special Collections Consultant Beth Bowden talking about some of the works on display as part of this exhibition from our own special collections related to immigration. And so with that, I'll thank you all again for joining us this afternoon, and please take care and be well. Over to you, Jen.
Great. Here is the video with Beth presenting some of our own special collections as related to immigration and migration.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad that you're here with us at Pequot Library for the opening of the Crossing the Border exhibition. I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking to you about the items from our special collections that are in the exhibit. First of all, quickly, what are special collections? They are manuscripts, rare books, and archives. And we have a couple of examples here today to show you. We don't have manuscripts, those things that are written by hand, but we have a very rare book here in front of me. This is the publication of Phyllis Wheatley's poems from 1786. I hope you can see today and during the exhibition period her poem called On Being Brought from Africa to America. She was indeed an early immigrant, not necessarily a willing one, but definitely one who put her time to good use. You'll see in these articles here on the table, as well as through the exhibit, the importance of language in all the materials. For example, Phyllis talks about God being a savior and questions the Christians and their treatment of Negroes. The next item is by Henry Trumbull, published in Boston in 1819. I'd like you to pay attention when you can to the lithograph in the frontispiece accompanying the title page. The title of Henry's work is History of the Discovery of America, of the Landing of Our Forefathers at Plymouth, and of their most remarkable engagements with the Indians in New England, from their landing in 1620 until the final subjugation of the natives in 1679. So Henry is telling us a story of the very first settlers, the first immigrants, if you will, who instead of working with the natives are working towards their final subjugation. We contrast that now with a poster from World War I, prepared by Howard Chandler Christie in 1919. Christie was famous for what was called the Christie girl, a female image that was also always used in publications and in commercials for beauty products many times. This poster is quite different. It is called Americans All, and Christie lists what he calls an honor roll, on which you will see family names from almost all the immigrant groups in the United States at that time. So if this is part of the Victory Liberty Loan Program of World War I, Christie is saying we're all in this together. So we're all immigrants and we all have to work together. I hope you have a chance to come in or see us online to take a look closer at the special collections here at Pequot Library. Thank you.
Thank you to Beth for that fantastic vignette of what's to come. And as Beth mentioned, and as you may notice, I'm wearing my mask. I'm excited to say that this is the first virtual program that we have done from inside the library since March. I'm so happy to be here. The gallery is behind me. It is refreshed with this beautiful collection that Roger organized and helped create as part of Just Seeds, which is an artists cooperative of which he is a co-founder. Roger has organized international collaborative printmaking projects and installations, developed artistic tools in the service of conservation, and collaborated with artists, scientists, and organizers across the globe. He is the president of the board of directors of the Flight 64 Print Studio in Portland and coordinates the National Endangered Species Mural Project for the Center of Biological Diversity. I hope you will please come in during our browsing hours to see this incredible collection that we are so lucky to have. And Roger, with that, I will turn it over to you.
Great, thanks Jen, thanks everyone, thanks for those introductions, and thanks to everyone for being here, for your interest in this subject and in this project. This portfolio of prints, I forget exactly how many there are, but it's a project of the Just Seeds Artists Cooperative, a group that I'm a member of, and another organization called CultureStrike, which is now called the Center for Cultural Power. And both of these groups are cooperatives of artists that work together to promote various ideas relating to social movements or environmental movements. And one of the things that we do is produce these portfolios of prints that we imagine as educational cultural tools, like things that you can use to have events to like raise awareness about particular issues, or you can use as gathering points for people to come and learn about things, or to have popular organization and action, political action, social action of various sorts around these particular issues. So we've done a number of these over the years, and I've coordinated a couple of them. This one I sort of co-organized with Fabian Rodriguez, who is the executive director of the Center for Cultural Power, formerly CultureStrike. And we produced this with artists from Just Seeds and from CultureStrike, and then also other artists that we have worked with and whose work we admire and who we felt would be able to address the subject that we wanted to focus on. The portfolio itself was produced with master printer Paul Maloney in San Francisco, and it was produced about half and half on a letterpress, a Vandercook letterpress printer, letterpress press, and via screen print. And I did most of the screen printing, and Paul and his assistant coordinated the letterpress printing. Excuse me. So this project sort of it was produced in 2012, and it came as out of the sort of national flowering of organizing and action that kind of started after the passage of the law that is now known as SB 1070 in Arizona, which was the full name of it is the Support Our Law Enforcement and Safe Neighborhoods Act of 2010. And this law was sort of emblematic of a rightward shift in immigration policy and action at higher levels of power in the United States. And this law, basically, it's the law that said that officers are required to try to determine an individual's immigration status during a stop or a detention or an arrest, where there's reasonable suspicion, in quotes, that the subject is in the country illegally. And of course, this led to extensive, this was, believed that it would obviously lead to extensive racial profiling and harassment of migrant communities. And most portions of the law in the uproar that followed its passage, but that core element was allowed to remain and is still part of the state law in Arizona. And there was in the aftermath of this law, there was a surge of action and sort of popular investment in trying to address the ways in which U.S. migration policy had been becoming increasingly more more virulent and racist, and which is a process that has continued over time to the situation we find ourselves in now. But this was a project responding to how that seemed to be happening at the time in 2012. So this portfolio is a project of that. So what I'm going to do right now is just share my screen and go through some. I've just picked out a few of the prints from the portfolio that I think would just cover a range of the things that we were hoping people would address. And we allowed the artists that produced these works to choose their own subjects and to choose their own the things that they wanted to focus on. Like we didn't direct people, okay, you're going to work on this, you're going to work on this, you're going to work on this. People were allowed to take subjects that they found interesting. And these are all people who make politically and socially engaged art on a regular basis. And so it was really interesting to see the subjects that they picked out to work on. And they cover this broad range of issues that I think are really interesting and make the portfolio such I think it is a well-rounded piece of art. So I'm going to try sharing the screen now. Let's make sure that this works. Yes. Let me know when this is up. Does that work?
Yes, it's up.
If somebody is that good? Okay, great, cool. Okay, so this first image is a print by Raul Deal, who's a professor at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, and who is a colleague and really an impressive artist and printmaker. And this is a woodcut print that we turned into a letterpress print, I think, and the original is a very large wood carving it's a really impressive object to see. Like I think it's 24 by 36. Anyway, it's a very large carving. But so this image is addressing, the immigration policies that separate families that, families that make it across the border and are separated by, not ICE at the time, it was CBP. And it's interesting, a lot of the stuff has kind of changed, like the basic structure of the law and the sort of the direction of the intent has been getting sort of more virulent over time. But a lot of the specifics and maybe some of the specific actors and the specific laws that are being talked about in these prints are more specific to 2012 than they are necessarily to now, although some things do carry over. So in this image, there's a mention of the DREAM Act, and people are not familiar. The DREAM Act is a proposal to pass a law that would grant temporary residency to immigrants who entered the US as minors. And it was never passed, but portions of the law of its intent were addressed by the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program that Barack Obama instituted in 2012. And so this image is a call for that kind of broader amnesty for children whose parents brought them here when they were young, and many people still face deportation as a result of not having the proper the appropriate documents and being subject to these increasingly draconian immigration laws. This print is by Christine Versus, who is an artist who is a member of Just Seeds, and this is a very powerful story. It features a young woman whose name is Adama Ba, who is she came with her parents to the U.S. From Guinea in Africa when she was a child. Her parents brought her to the U.S. with the intention of sort of keeping her safe from forms of female genital mutilation prevalent in the area that their family was from in Guinea. But after 9/11, in the sort of general the mania about terrorism and the witch hunts that arose during that period of time, Adama became subject of like this FBI investigation that tried to paint her as this participant in various forms of terrorism, and she became the youngest person ever to be arrested by the FBI in association with a terrorism investigation, and she was 16 at the time. She spent some time in a detention facility and had to wear an ankle bracelet afterwards, but she was eventually cleared of all charges and nothing. But there was no reconciliation with that. So that's another. I feel like this print is a really great example of just sort of it shows the global beyond most of these prints in this like focus on the relationship between the U.S. and its southern border. But this print focuses on the global connections that this country has a huge immigrant population and has always been a place that welcomes migrants to varying degrees. And this story shows the failures of this country to live up to some of the promises that it's made. Moving on to the next. This is a print by Nicholas Lampert, who's another member of Just Seeds. And I really enjoy this print. I feel like he does a great job of putting together these simple symbols that really convey a lot of information. The text at the top says solidarity with migrant workers, not agribusiness. And what Nicholas is referring to here is, where's that note? I mean, he's referring to the passage of NAFTA under Clinton and how one of the consequences of NAFTA was that American corn producers were able to dump their cheap excess corn essentially into Mexico as a result of this liberalized trade agreement, which had the effect of sort of collapsing corn prices and putting huge numbers of small-scale corn producers out of business across Mexico. And basically the upshot of that was that there was a massive wave of migration to the north because people's livelihoods had been destroyed by the arrival of this cheap mass of American corn that also had an effect of eliminating a lot of the native corn biodiversity in Mexico, because people didn't just grow one variety of corn. People grow all sorts of different varieties that have been developed over centuries and millennia. And now that is much less the case. And the people whose livelihoods they lost, they ended up, many people thought that they could seek a better life in the U.S., so they tried to make their way north. So this is a print that I made for the portfolio, and one of the things that I was trying to do was connect the phenomenon of just to think about migration and how it exists in a lot of different contexts. It exists in the world outside of humanity, and it exists in the culture and social world that we inhabit as well. So I wanted to try to use the image of monarch butterflies as a way of getting people to think about how migration affects different species, different contexts differently. But also that some of the same forces that affect migrants that are human also affect migrants of other species, like monarch butterflies. Like the monarchs travel to and from Mexico every year, and they overwinter in the pine forest of the Sierra Madre in the northern sort of central Mexico, and in U.S. They pollinate a lot of plants, and they have historically like migrated to the areas across like the entire Midwest and eastern seaboard of the U.S. There's another sort of population that is more focused on the western part of the country, but in Mexico, the felling of the pine forest to clear land for the planting of drug crops that are intended for export across the border to the U.S. has led to a lot of the forests that the monarchs live in being decimated. And in the U.S., the agricultural fields that are sort of heavily sprayed with pesticides, which kill monarchs that are trying to feed on different kinds of milkweed that live in those regions. So, and in the U.S., at the same time, the people who are working in those fields are often migrant farm workers from Mexico. And then people who are being used in Mexico, people are fleeing the sort of invasion of their territories by cartels that are producing these drug crops, are fleeing that and heading north to try and cross the border to the U.S. So just trying to show the interconnectivity of these issues. And this is a much more sort of blunt and graphic representation of a similar idea. This is by the co-creator of this portfolio, Fabian Rodriguez, and this is her like creation of this very sort of this stylized poster graphic that is intended to communicate the same thing, that the drug war is a major driver of migrant populations in the U.S. And in addition has also become something that preys very heavily on migrants as they're making their way north, and exploits people as mules to try to move the drugs that people are trying to get across the border. And like the people who are at the bottom of the ladder, the migrants themselves are the people who suffer the most in the situation. And this poster is by an artist named Irina. And this is an interesting print because it focuses on the idea of illegality. And there was in the movements to try to address the issue of migration in the aftermath of the passage of these laws that I was talking about earlier, there was a real push to try to eliminate the concept of the illegal immigrant from public discourse. You may sort of be familiar with the phrase "nobody is illegal," and that was intended to say that these people cannot be elite. These people who are trying to travel across the border to new lives, different economic opportunities, or to be with their families, aren't inherently illegal. And calling them an illegal immigrant gives them this imbues them with this sort of criminal quality that makes people, that contributes to public mistrust. But this print, which I think is very interesting, it pushes back on that idea with the saying that the subject of these declarations of illegality are not interested in being subject to the laws and the machinations of politics that declare them to be this or that. That they are, this is the person sort of claiming an identity of being illegal as a way of saying that they are not subject to any of these laws, and they make their own reality and they make their own life outside of the stipulations and the power struggles that are going on at higher levels of government. I think it's a very interesting piece, and it was a little bit controversial within the production of the portfolio. So this is a print by Peet Yank. No, sorry. And this is a very evocative piece. I really love Peet does amazing things with depth and emotion in his work, and I think this is one of my favorite pieces in this portfolio, just by virtue of how it describes one of the central themes that I think a lot of people are interested in, which is the disparate effects of migration policy on different economic levels. Here you see a migrant worker.
I want to run again tomorrow.
Did you run this morning or?
I did an hour bike ride, remember?
Sorry, there's somebody speaking. If you could just mute yourself, please.
Sorry about that. The migrant worker is blocked from his transit by this wall, but the products of industry are free to migrate back and forth above him with no restriction. And this is a stylized representation of the way things look at the border, but it does kind of look a lot like this. There is this militarized, heavily secure physical barrier that prevents people moving at ground level across this arbitrary line in the sand, and there are these structures that permit and facilitate the transit of the products of industry across that invisible line in the sand. And migration is always at heart an economic issue, and the people who are subject to the immigration law are always the people who do not have the economic power to make the choices that people with access to economic power can make. Like when we talk about migration policy and the migrants who die in the desert outside of Tucson, we're not talking about wealthy people. We're talking about poor people. Wealthy people can make it into this country no problem. Wealthy people can go wherever they want. Wealthy people are not subject to law. They're not subject. Law limits possibility. That is for the poor and exclusively for the poor, and also for people who don't. The people who are stuck on the wrong side of the wall. So this is a print by Sean Schleifer, who's another Just Seeds member. This is an interesting print. It addresses a subject that is kind of outside of some of the normal ambit of what people are talking about in a lot of these prints, and it addresses the way that the militarization of the border affects like wild animal populations. With the example that Sean is using here, this jaguar, who I think it's Fish and Wildlife Service named Macho B. I mean, just macho because the animal was a male, and I think B because it was the second jaguar they had studied in this particular way. And Sean has written a really interesting essay about this subject and the research that he put into it on the Just Seeds blog. That if you're interested in reading more about it, I think it's a fascinating story that involves some really interesting characters and some it's really worth the read. I won't do it justice in summarizing it, but the jaguars have moved across this arbitrary line for as long as there have been jaguars. Who knows how long that is? Many millions of years, and now are sort of grievously interrupted by the interposition of this large metal barrier in their path, and they can no longer. And Macho B was at the time the last jaguar in the United States, and died as a result of like this really unpleasant mismanagement of his attempts to, to monitor his movements and to assess him. Like the subject of an awful lot of scientific and political attention, and then he was trapped in a snare and died. So it's a pretty unpleasant story. There are a couple more jaguars that have made it across the border since in the years since Macho B died. But with the current construction of the wall ramping up in Arizona and Sonora, on this Arizona-Sonora border at the moment, it seems very, very unlikely that will continue, which is a really unpleasant thing to think about. So this is a print by Jesse Purcell, who's a Canadian artist, also a Just Seeds artist, and is a very simple and kind of harsh, polemic image that describes something of what I was talking about before, of the the economic quality of migration. That there's this, people, I'm sure everyone is familiar with the narrative that it's the immigrants that the popular right-wing narrative that we have to stop migration because when migrants arrive, they take away from people who have been in this place for longer, and that's not fair. But the real issue, as far as I'm concerned, I think that a lot of people involved in this project are concerned, is that the actual reason that people don't have those jobs, or that their jobs are under threat, is that people with powerful economic interests are, in pursuit of higher rates of profit, moving those jobs somewhere else where they can pay the recipients of those jobs smaller amounts of money and thus reserve all the money for themselves. This is not a hard thing to understand, but it is a very powerful political tool because it's, it's easy to persuade people, unfortunately, that their livelihood is under threat by people who they can be taught to perceive as outsiders, where in reality there are no outsiders in this world. We're all here together. This is the final print from this portfolio, from this like small selection. There's a lot more prints in the portfolio, so I hope you will go check out the whole thing at the library. This is another one of my favorite images from this set of prints. And this is by an artist named Fernando Martin, another Just Seeds artist. And just sort of this fanciful image of a quetzal bird, which is a bird from Central America, a very beautiful, striking flycatcher with very vivid colors, very metallic feathers, and these long streaming tail feathers that are quite striking. A sacred bird in many cultures, very symbolic of a lot of the indigenous cultures of southern Mexico and the other Central American countries like Guatemala and El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Honduras, and Belize. And this just, I was imagining this quetzal, flying through a gap in the wall. And I just looking at the way Fernando's drawn the wall here just really reminds me, because I wake up every day and I look at Twitter and I see the advancing panels of the wall that is being built in the desert south of Tucson right now, and it looks very similar to this. And it's closing in. It's closing in on completing a barrier through some of the most rugged wildlands in the Southwest. And it's just the way to resist it seems so difficult, seems so distant, and very hard to imagine the way of creating some kind of of interruption in the process that is causing this to happen, because it is happening. And I mean, and the works in this portfolio, can serve as in the best circumstance, they serve as like assistance to imagination, like to hoping that they can contribute to people imagining a different way to relate to migration, in a different way to relate to the passage of people and animals and insects and everything else through the world, and a way to create a general sense of solidarity and mutual aid with each other, as opposed to these processes of isolation that make nobody richer except for the people who are already rich. Okay, I guess that's my presentation. I will unshare the screen. Okay, I've done it.
Thank you so much. That was so fantastic. And I selfishly am happy that you selected some of my personal favorite images from the collection. So a couple questions for you. I don't see anything in the chat just yet. So I did want to mention that if anybody has a question for Roger, please just put it in the chat and we can get to it. Roger, how long did it take to assemble this body of work?
How long did it take? I'd say that the whole project took about 6 months.
Wow.
I think from beginning to end. I could be undercutting that, but that sort of seems to be how I remember it. You know, the actual the longest portion was was getting the artists, coordinating the artists to produce the works. But since we are all, Fabiana and I are in relationship with all of these artists, and we already had a process set up from previous projects. It was pretty easy to put this in, say, like, we want to do this portfolio about migration. Okay, send this invitation to who wants to participate. Like, just sending an invitation out, like, does this sound like something you want to participate? We can pay you a small amount of money. We'll do all this printing. You'll get a copy of it at the end of the process. And then we got the artists, I think, pretty quickly. And then it was just a question of saying, how's that going? Did you finish your art yet? Until that was all done, and then moving that into the production phase, and that happened very quickly. I think I was at Paul's studio on Treat Street in San Francisco for no more than 10 days, and I think we produced 75% of the actual prints during that time. I came back to Portland and printed the rest of the prints in Portland, and then we designed and printed the covers of the portfolio and the colophon, and then we had them distributed through the Just Seeds site, and then through an artist book and portfolio publisher and distributor called Booklyn, which is in New York.
Awesome. We have a question from Christine who's asking, why did they decide to do prints for the topic? And was there a significance in choosing this type of format over other forms of art?
Most of the people in Just Seeds are all of the people in Just Seeds are printmakers, and people to varying degrees do their own printmaking or design artwork for printmaking. And one of the printmaking for the dissemination of social and political messages, just because it is based on the production of multiples. If you want to communicate something and you make 50 copies of it, it's going to end up in 50 places with 50 audiences looking at it, as opposed to just one object, which is it may be more difficult unless you are an institution to get that big of an audience to come and visit and look at that one object. So we've envisioned these portfolios as just ways to create these objects of art that can generate audiences in a broad variety of contexts. Like here, in your context, it's going to be at the library, so you can come and visit it. I've organized showings of it at just like an evening showing of it at a political event in Portland, or at like a social event where people can come and look at this thing, and it's up for like a couple nights or a week, and then it's down and it goes somewhere else. So just producing it in this way, it is intended as a fine art object, but it also has this popular quality in that it isn't enormously expensive, and it is easy to hang in a kind of an informal way, and to do that work of getting the message out.
Sure. That's great. Thank you. Beth is asking, the portfolio comes out in 2012. Some specific practices, the separation of families, for example, have changed in name or concept. However, the themes resound loudly with today. This is what we were talking about just prior. what projects are your colleagues working on to show current immigrant situations?
People are working on different things in different ways. Like some of the Milwaukee artists that are included in this are working with organization in Milwaukee called what's it called? Voces de la Frontera, which is a migrant, an immigrant community, migrant right activist organization in Milwaukee that is doing a lot of outreach within communities and sort of community defense in the face of pressure from CBP and ICE. As we've worked with No More Deaths, and that is an organization that does direct aid to migrants in the desert outside of Tucson, just producing some art stuff for them or trying to do fundraisers for them and their efforts. And I know that like people involved in CultureStrike are daily involved in all sorts of organizing around migrant issues. That's one of their major focuses on as a political arts organization. And just doing like people produce just trying to get various forms of creative media like this out in as many ways as possible, like in the form of like political comics that run in newspapers or on the internet, in the form of producing graphics and banners and signs for street protests, like doing these big productions of messaging and imagery that are intended for people to carry at protests. There's a whole world of stuff that people have continued to work on over the years.
Mm-hmm. And I guess kind of piggybacking onto that, I had a question also, which is looking at the contemporary landscape of issues that immigrants are facing. Do you think there are themes or I guess like specific things and challenges that are cropping up now versus in 2012 that would be added to this if you were to redo it now?
Sure. I mean, the unpleasant reality is that things have just gotten so much worse. Just the issue of the concentration camps and the prosecution of basically infants for immigration crimes by the federal government. I mean, the list is unpleasantly vast. I mean, there's so many things you could continue, but in addition to it, these issues persist, and they persist in a lot of the same ways, and they generate a lot of the same visual signifiers, and so you can use the same visual signifiers to talk about it now as you could before, which is why this portfolio has this sort of timeless quality to it, because a lot of the stuff is it's the same stuff right now. It's just that right now the volume is up and the contrast is very harsh. Mm-hmm. It's no good, folks. But it's also important to note that this is not a specifically partisan issue. These things have been going on under a variety of different administrations, and this is national policy, and it is existing at a national level, and all powerful entities are to blame. It's not just the Democrats or the Republicans, but it's both.
Mm-hmm. Kind of digging deeper into that, Brad asks, what is being done to engage with immigrants, both new arrivals and those who have been here for a while, to see how this exhibit speaks to their realities and how they relate to these pieces? So are you getting interaction in that way?
Well, I mean, not necessarily personally. I mean, I this was produced 8 years ago, and I worked for basically for the several years after that, and trying to promote it and try to get it out into as many hands as possible and as many contexts as possible. And I've organized a couple of showings of it over the years, but but I've moved on to other projects at this point, and I'm working on different things. No, I mean, I can see Brad in the chat. I appreciate that. I think that there are other projects underway, not by me, not necessarily by Just Seeds, but certainly by CultureStrike, to create new work that engages with the new reality of migrants, and to respond to the issues as they change over time, and as certain things become more immediate, like the separation, the separation of children from families, and the concentration camps in the desert. Brad has one specific thing about the first woodcut, the first print. I believe that initial wood block was 2 feet tall by 3 feet wide. I feel like it might be a little bit bigger than that, actually. It might be 3 feet by 4 feet. Anyway, it's big, huge.
Oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, Beth just mentions that many books on display bear out Roger's point that the immigrant challenges have been going on relentless of the party, or regardless of the party in the government. And Beth is referring to the special collections items that we have on display here. We have another question. We were just wondering if the prints have affected any change that you know of directly, and what can viewers do in response? Do you have any resources that you can recommend? Are there, in addition to go vote?
I mean, every place in the country has organizations that are working on these issues, and I'm sure would love to receive new participants and new volunteers. And I think that, just sort of, and doing an online search for migrant rights, your city, you would be able to turn up something, or like do it on social media. You'll be able to turn up some people working on these issues. Trying to find, like, figuring out like local immigration legal organizations. I'm sure that people who are involved in doing legal work around immigration, sort of people defending people from arrest and deportation. The people in like legal firms that do that kind of work would have information about that. Just trying to, certain things that I think I've noticed happening a lot in the West is just people paying attention to when ICE raids are scheduled to happen, or when sort of deportations of people who are already arrested are planning to happen, and physically blocking those vehicles from being able to move around. That seems to be a pretty productive thing that people are doing. And I guess it's because this is such a pervasive issue, it's never going to be hard to find things to work on where you are. And, like, voting is fine, but voting is only one day a year. And the rest of the time, there's relationships to build that you can build in your community if this is something that you want to get involved in. There's a question from Larry that says, how do you envision immigration that protects both citizens and immigrants? How do you suggest allowing immigration while protecting it against concerns over drug and sex trafficking? I'd say that that a lot of these issues are all tied into what I was saying about the economics, limits and controls who gets to do the immigrating. If people were not disinvested of their livelihoods by like massive corporate power moving its industry around the world in pursuit of the lowest wage, there would be very little to no pressure for people to do the kind of migrating that they're doing right now. So creating some limitations on the ability of that kind of corporate power to do the things it does that destroy our community and destroy the world, that would be a great place to start, because that is where the problem comes from. And the problem isn't coming from the desperate people, like the desperate people who are trying to escape these countries in Central America that the United States foreign policy has made into extremely unpleasant places to live. And they're moving away from that. And the irony moving directly towards the country that created a lot of the problems that are making them leave. And I think a lot of this, relates to, other part of your question, like about drug and sex trafficking. A lot of these things, they're like the drug war is something that is happening with the collusion of the highest levels of finance and power. Like, I don't know if you all remember the bank HSBC, one of the largest banks in the world, which was caught red-handed laundering billions of dollars in drug money directly from Mexican cartels several years ago, and faced almost no consequences of any sort for that. That is happening in plain sight. And how we can acquire the power to influence what banks of that size do, and how we can influence their ability to collaborate directly with these murderous criminal organizations, is something I don't necessarily have an answer to. But that's where the real issue is, and it's not with desperate people trying to find a better life for themselves. There's a question from Janet that says, you might have explained this already, but how do you reach diverse audiences, and do you respond to a variety of responses? The artistic communities that sort of form, that Just Seeds and CultureStrike are a part of, involve a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds, and so we have connections to a lot of different communities to try and distribute the messages that we're trying to produce. And I think we do a pretty good job of that. We could always do a better job, but I think that I'm pretty satisfied with how broadly we managed to distribute this project, and also the one that came after it, which is about sort of small frontline groups responding to issues.
That's great. I mean, thank you so much, Roger, for your time. We really appreciate it. And again, we are so happy to have this collection here at the library. I did want to mention, with regards to how people can, make an impact locally, we are partnered with the Connecticut Institute for Refugees and Immigrants, CIRI, with this exhibit. We've partnered with them before, but specifically with this exhibit, they looked at our narrative, and we were getting some feedback there. But they are political activists, lawyers, helping refugees and immigrants in Connecticut across a multitude of issues, doing outreach in schools and working with families. And I hope you will all just look forward to some programming that we will have coming up with them here at the library. Keep your eye out for that. And of course, there are plenty of volunteer opportunities as well. Roger, thank you so much. If there isn't anything else, Jane is clapping. Yeah, we applaud your work. We are so happy for your knowledge here. Resounding thank yous in the chat. Again, we were just, it's so special for us to be able to have somebody from Portland, Oregon joining us in our gallery for this kind of thing. So we're grateful for your perspective, and and wish you the best. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. I really everybody question your interest in the subject. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you. This will be up on our YouTube channel. If anyone has missed it, we'll make sure that we post it and circulate it around. And I hope everybody has a really great night.
Great. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.